Before we get to the approval of the minutes, I'd like to introduce our newest member, Hugh Beast. And Hugh, would you just give us a little background?
I've been in Vero Beach for 16 years. I have been active in city council affairs. And maybe this will damn me, I don't know, but I'm one of the founding members of the Indian River Neighborhood Association. I have been a general partner and managing director of a Wall Street investment banking firm, and I've been a vice president and treasurer of a multinational consumer products company. So I think I understand balance sheets and income statements, or did think I did, until I started looking at municipal accounting. And as Noah has said to me, it's different. And I think I'll catch on in time. And I look forward to helping in any way I can.
Well, thank you and welcome. I also wanted to thank Scott McCracken for his services through the years and wish him well in the future. With that, can we get to the approval of the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I recommend we approve the minutes of October 23rd, 2014.
Second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Well, as you know, it is the policy of this commission that public comment is open after any and all subjects. If there's any public comment, regardless of what it says on the agenda. So, seeing none, we have an election of the officers. First for chairman. Do I have any nominations?
I nominate Peter Gorey.
I'll second that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. For vice chairman, I want to nominate Glenn Brovant.
Second that.
Any other nominations? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Congratulations. All right. The chairman's matters. I do have some comments, but I want to reserve them till later. I have asked Jim O'Connor to comment on the status of some of the latest occurrences, and there's been quite a few lately. So, Jim, if you would appreciate your comments and anything that's come over the wall the last day or so.
Well, let me tell you where we are in the mediation process. As you know, the Indian River Shores filed suit under state law that is held in abeyance while we go through a state-required mediation process, and that's 3 steps. One is the administration meets. The second step is where the elected officials, the boards of each city and the counties involved. And then the third, which is the one we're in the final, which is the real mediation. And it's going to be held on the 17th. And this mediation is a little different than any mediation I've participated in the fact that it's going to be open. We will not be going to the various rooms. The mediator will be talking openly like that, and more than likely there will be public comment. And it starts at 9 o'clock. And so it's the third and final stage. Assuming that we don't reach an agreement there, then the Indian River Shores, 10 days thereafter, have the right to refile the suit and open it back up into the courts, which they have indicated that's what they plan to do. The other side of the coin has been the county, in which the county filed with the Public Service Commission, and they had asked 14 questions They went through, we got the staff review and recommendations to the Public Service Commission members. The day of the hearing, the county withdrew that their request of the Public Service Commission. Yesterday, we received a copy of a letter to the Public Service Commission from the county that said they wanted to reinstate their petition as it was originally filed. So the latest date that we can get to for them under this filing that they have proposed will be sometime in February. So we'll be going through the Public Service Commission process, I presume, again, and talking about those 14 issues. I'm not really sure how the staff there rewrites their recommendations. I presume they'll stay the same, but that'll be a process that the Public Service Commission will have between now and February to determine how they're going to handle that, and then what the recommendation from the Public Service Commission will be. So we're in both of those elements right now. It is anticipated that probably after the first of the year is when most of the activity will start again, unless we reach some mediation agreement on the 17th. We are planning a special council meeting on the 17th following our mediation, just to sort of make sure the City Council is brought up to date as to where we are in the mediation process and the understanding as to what our understanding is as to the path going forward in both of those scenarios. So we do have a council meeting, and I believe it's going to be scheduled for 5 o'clock on the 17th. So that's really where we are right now. We're still working. We have talked to OUC, as you are aware. We brought back a proposal from OUC. We heard some concerns from the various commissions and individuals. One is that we were giving up our ownership of St. Lucie, and the second is that OUC was getting an exclusive right to get out of the contract without us doing that. So we brought back a second proposal that reduces the number of years that we'd be in contractual agreements with OUC, gives us that right to pull out, and not only gives us the right, it says that we will exit 7 years shorter. And then the other element is that we would retain the ownership of the St. Lucie plant. The gas issue was a point of concern or discussion. The problem with the gas, it is a take or pay. Now, we have in a provision in there that we would be able to retain ownership of that gas if we built power generation at the site, or to a site to be where the gas could be used. But under state rules and regulations, we cannot buy the gas, for example, at 82 cents and sell it for $1.25. It has to only be sold to ventures at the same price in which we are paying, and we would be subject to that take or pay, so we'd be paying for that gas whether we used it or not. So we did not see that as a real give to OUC, but we did have the provision that we would be able to use the gas if, in fact, we decided to do some generation.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, Jim, did I hear you say that the county is coming back with the same 14 questions? Have they refined the questions, or?
No, sir. As a matter of fact, the letter that we received, it just said that they're just going to resubmit, or they have, what they've asked is the Public Service Commission just consider that as resubmittal of existing.
With no change in the
we didn't change
nature
anything.
Of the questions?
No, sir.
And all of the municipals of the co-ops and of the investor-owned utility companies have sought to intervene.
Yeah.
And all of them are against, as I read what the depositions were, are asking the Public Service Commission not to grant subordination of the service territory. That's my understanding.
Yeah, court rulings and all documents to this point have given the service area authority to the Public Service Commission, and they have used that throughout the years as their way of maintaining the reliability of the total statewide network and system. But no one can see where there has been a reversal of that of the Public Service Commission. There have been amendments and changes to service areas, but typically it was swapping of one area for another area.
I guess obviously from a finance point of view, if all of the lawyers and all of the other utilities, notwithstanding our own cost and the county cost, are all piled on, plus trips that all of the representatives have to make to Tallahassee, all for this pinwheeling and status quo. It seems to me that it's rather a costly exercise at the expense of our ratepayers and taxpayers and the entities that are involved in defending themselves against this suit.
Mr. Chairman, just a couple of questions. Jim, just out of curiosity, any thoughts on why they pulled it off, why the county pulled that back from the Public Service Commission in the first place?
No, sir, they did not share that with us. As a matter of fact, it was about ready to be read on the docket because there were others that were pulled off of that agenda, but it was right when the chairman started to introduce it is when it was pulled at that point.
Second question, and I'm glad you said that, Peter, are all the hearings going to be held in Tallahassee?
Yes, sir, that's where the Public Service Commission meets.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't know if they would have another hearing further down and make it a little more convenient.
No, because we're not the only item on the agenda. Usually, for example, we were number 23 out of 24.
Okay.
But the fact is that about 17 of them were pulled before the meeting even started. So you get down, I mean, it was in a couple hours we were down to us, and then we pulled it, or they pulled it.
Kind of like the NCAA ratings, right?
Just about. It's unpredictable, and you know, fortunately for me, the mayor's not here right now, but I handled the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and then he wanted to know if I wanted to go up to the PSC, and I said, hey, I've already sat through some of this, and there's, you know, it's one of those that you never know what's going to happen, and it is unfortunate that we didn't even have the hearing. At least at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they went through the process.
Jim, next on the mediation question, since that's open to the public, is that going to be a televised program, or is it going to be cambered, or what's the story?
No, minutes will be taken, and it's my understanding in talking to the city clerk, because we were sort of hoping that somebody would take the minutes, but it appears that we're going to have 3-minute takers. Each city and the county are going to do their own minutes. I presume Tammy and the folks will have to sit down afterwards and go through all that and figure out whose minutes are going to be rule the roost. But the good thing is we don't have to go back and adopt the minutes, because if, knock on wood, this will sort of end that process.
So there's no hired transcriber at all, taking all the notes for the whole thing?
No, sir.
There's no tape?
This is a real different mediation, and I've been through several. Probably you all have as well. You know, where you go to the center room and you talk about the issues, then everybody goes to a room, and then you get to call the other guy bad names, but you don't get recorded. Right. And then they all come together, and the guy runs back and forth and tries to solve the problem. I presume we won't be calling each other bad names because we're going to be looking at each other, so that'll take that element out of it. I'm just not sure how it reaches a conclusion, because up to this point, we've had these public meetings, and this is just going to be a continuing of that same process.
Is there going to be, is there going to be public comment?
Yeah.
It's anticipated to be public comment. Yeah. It's going to be held at the community center.
Strange.
It's doing it Indian River County style. You know, we're a little different than the rest of the world, so we're reintroducing it.
And who sets the rules for how this is going to be performed? Is that state code? Or?
Well, we had a big debate about the Sunshine Law. Yeah. And now the way the mediation was really set up, we thought, was that it would be like myself, Wayne Commett, and Chef, and then the county would have the county administrator, their county attorney, and then their legal advisor, and then Indian River Shores would do the same thing. And then one of the attorneys started saying, well, wait a minute, this is, you know, in state law, so therefore I think it comes under sunshine. And so we went around and around over that. We wrote to the folks at the Department of Ethics, or whatever they call themselves, And her recommendation, to be on the safe side, you ought to do it in the sunshine. Well, so then we went through the exercise of, well, do we still have breakout rooms? Well, there's no reason to have breakout rooms if we're all going to be, if minutes are going to be taken and discussed, and then you would have the public sort of confused as to, what breakout room do I want to go to type of thing. So I think that's where we have come to the conclusion we'll just do it. But again, this is similar to what we did at the last two,
right.
Actually the last three meetings that we've had.
Interesting.
But when you get all that many attorneys together trying to have a meeting, I guess we're lucky we're still just in 2014 and we're going to have the meeting.
It should be an interesting meeting.
I'm not sure how interesting it'll be, but it'll be a meeting.
Well, in response to one of the demands of Indian River Shores, there was the issue of putting together a referendum and a utility authority. And I know that in response to the demands of Indian River Shores, I know that you've been viewing it, and it's somewhat in advance, as I understand, until the mediation.
That is correct. What we were trying to do is there's several elements to this litigation. One is the rates, and we want you out of our city, the franchise is over, and therefore we're going to get FP&L and have FP&L rates. So that's one element. The second element is the city back in 2008 violated the state law because we didn't conform to the law that was passed at that point. The city has been very clear that we do not think we violated any law there, but in order to accommodate the request, we will go back and try to work with that state law and have the referendum that is required. Then upon passage of the referendum, then we will set up a utility authority in conformance to the way the state law intended or the way it seems to be written. As a matter of fact, we went to the supervisor of elections, and she says, listen, I have no database for this. There's no way that we could do it because the way it's written, every meter, every person who has a meter, the name in the meter gets a vote. For example, if you go to the hospital and they have, let's say, 13 meters, and it's all in the name of Indian River County Hospital, they only get one vote. And then you have to go through the process of who represents that entity that gets to vote. In your home, if you and your wife are there and you have one utility account, then only one of you get to vote. And so the supervisor of elections had no way of doing that. And you don't have to be a registered voter or any of that kind of stuff. And so the process of getting through that is a little bit complicated, so we've hired a guy to sort of give us the expertise on working through that exercise. Now, we have put that in abeyance. The only thing we have is we have the authority if, at the end of the day, if Indian River Shores still says that's one of their issues, then we'll have to do it. Then we also have the element that a resident of Indian River Shores has said that, we violated their civil rights or something because our rates are too high and it's unreasonable and this kind of stuff. That'll be another element that we will have to address probably in a jurisdiction that'll have competency over that. But those seem to be our primary, and what we were trying to do in the mediation is address those concerns. And we've said at all three of the mediation meetings, the City of Vero Beach will not be able to meet FP&L rates. We will do what we can to bring our rates down, which is what we're trying to do. But we will not be able to reach FP&L rates. So by definition, mediation is trying to get to the middle ground. And at this point, there's been no indication that they want anything other than Florida Power and Light rates, and I'm not sure we'd be able to grant that.
I just want to make another comment. On this referendum, it said each customer has one vote. There are about 28,000 residential customers in the system and fewer than 4,000 business. Piper, which has $1.8 million a year in utility bills, has one vote. As a homeowner, mine is under $1,000, and Sharon and I have one vote. So this whole process, based upon what the statutes require, is somewhat skewed and not only complicated, but obviously, as Jim pointed out, is going to be difficult, plus costly to the city.
Plus, at the end of the day, it doesn't really solve the mathematical problems of the rate. So it's sort of, and it doesn't change where power has to rest if the financial base of the utility is still centered in the city. And all the money, we're not going to walk away from the bonds. The bondholders are not going to let us walk away from the bonds.
No, if you had a utility authority, they would have to accept our liabilities in our power supply contracts. I mean, that's a given. And then they would have to be recognized also by FMPA, which is another one of those trials and tribulations of life. But establishing the referendum is one challenge, but getting through to the utility authority will be another, and then the governance of that. But the resolution that was passed by the city council just said that gave me the authority to sit down with the Indian River Shores and the county to try to see if we can work out a utility authority that would be agreeable to all three parties.
An attempt to show good faith, and is clearly what it is.
Yes, sir.
Attempt to show good faith.
That's what we've been doing all along through this whole exercise, is trying to show good faith and address the concerns that have been voice to us.
Right.
Jim, it sounds to me like that there is really no common ground between their position and our position, that we're going to do the best we can, but we know we can't meet those rates. So there's sort of a no man's land in between there. And I guess I'm sitting here thinking, okay, what if they rule against us, against the city? And could you elaborate on what that would mean to the ratepayers that then would live in the city that would bear that kind of cost?
Well, that's another one of those things. You got to remember, the lawsuit is really an Indian River Shores lawsuit. It is not, the county has joined in on the mediation, but in fact, they are not part of the lawsuit. But let's say the lawsuit goes as it's presently filed, and we lose Indian River Shores, and somehow that we lose that case. They represent about 7 to 8% of our customer base. So in theory, we would lose 8% of our revenues, as well as 8% of the customer base itself. Now, on top of that, then you have the issue of how much would we be reimbursed? I mean, you can't eminent domain our assets, so somewhere along the line there would have to be some compensation to try to mitigate some of that, and nobody has any earthly idea what that would be. But Noah, what it really gets down to is that we would have probably a slight increase in our electric rates. We would have to generate new revenues if we maintain the level of services through property taxes, but it would not be insurmountable. The city council can do it by majority vote for what we would need, what Cindy and I have worked out in numbers to meet what the challenge would be. But now if the county joined in on the lawsuit and we lost the whole suit, that's 60%, then you're at a very substantial loss. The problem that we would envision in that is that there are a lot of bondholders, i.e. FMPA. I am not sure that a court could say that drive us in default of those bonds. And our bonds are really pledged by the rate and the customers, and that's based on the 34,000, and because it's not only on the bonds that were issued in 2008 or the agreement in 2008, but it's based on future growth of the system. Would FMPA not raise too much of a cane if you walked away, or the bondholders and whoever it might be, if we lost 7 to 8% of the customers? That's one thing. If you lose 60% of the customers, and so then I think you have an issue with our legal obligations of those bonds and the pledges that have been made on those bonds, and so that gets us back into another type of situation that. Again, I'm just not sure that it's be just as simple as a court case saying that you have to give up 60% of your customers. But I will say now, and it's important that we all know, the city has pretty good standing in this. That we have a service area that was granted by the state of Florida, and we did, and I think it can be shown that we did rationally and using industry standards, provided for future power supply to serve not only the present customers but future customers. And that is, under that service agreement, we had to have not only the infrastructure but also the capacity available that we cannot deny service to any customer within our service area. So there were prudent decisions. Whether coal was the right fuel or not the right fuel and all that other stuff is one thing, but the mere fact that we made provisions based on service areas granted by the state for future customer growth, and that we had the responsibility to provide those services, is how decisions were made. So somebody somewhere would have to say that in the industry today that there should be nobody investing in a power plant, because theoretically, if you took away 60% of Duke Energy's, and Duke has a similar situation as we do, and that's one of the reasons they're involved, is because they border FP&L. And in some of those cases, they border in cities, and in some cases, they border in counties. And if you're a city of Bushnell, as an example, and I don't know if it's the case in them, but if you went and said, wait a minute, Duke, I want you out of here, I want FP&L. FP&L built load for their customers, and Duke built load for their customers. And so it's not as easy as just saying we're going to shrink everybody down to find the lowest common denominator, because then, rationally thinking, why would a city ever grant a franchise agreement? I mean, you'd always want to keep the flexibility. If I don't want this customer, these people in here, so there is some logic behind, I think, our position. And so that's the type of exercise we'll be going through, if that logic holds.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I appreciate that explanation. And, Mr. Chairman, the reason I asked that because I knew Jim was well-versed in it, and that also lets the folks know that, we're in a good position. I mean, for where we are, we're in a good position. We've done all the right things for the right reasons, and so we'll just have to wait and find out how that goes.
It's a very unfortunate situation that we're in. I mean, there's no question about that. If there was a solution, and we thought we had the solution, that is selling of the electric utility, and that's another element. It's still there. That is still good till 2016 if we can find a way of disposing of power supply agreements.
I just point out that there's a willing buyer and a willing seller of this utility. FPL values it at $170 million. 60%, which is the customers, of $170 million is $112 million for those 60% that are outside of the area. Now, that is what Jim is addressing, saying, what are you going to do? You just can't strand all those assets and strand all the bondholders. So,
and I wish the formula was that easy, but the other
I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that those are the facts on the table, Jim. That's all I'm reporting.
Plus that, when you look at a return on capital, our return on capital is still only about 6%, and the public utility is well above that.
Well,
so on a fairness basis, we're not.
Yeah, and when you start chopping up the utility, you got to remember the other requirement of the Public Service Commission is the reliability of the total entity statewide, and we have a lot of substations that are not within our city limits that are responsible for reliability and sustainability of even just the city customers. So we have those elements that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, aside from this offer of trying to get lower rates, I mean, Chef Wright has said we can't get FP&L rates to the shores, but we can, if certain conditions are met, we can reduce the rates somewhat. In addition to that, have there been any, I know there's been negotiations between the Vero and the shores, since the second meeting. Has there been any offers of settlement made? I don't want you to disclose anything that's, secret, but any offers?
No, sir, there hasn't. And if we did receive an offer, rest assured it would be a public document at this stage. Okay. We have, the communications are not like on a daily basis. They are probably on a weekly basis, but there has really been nothing to get right down to the fine tuning.
Comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's anything else.
This civil rights, is there any, it seems frivolous, is there any validity to that?
I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on TV, but I will say that that residential customer has not been treated any differently than any other residential customer in our system.
It seems very frivolous.
Thank you, Jim. Any public comment? Seeing none, we are required each December to report to the City Council on the annual report of the Finance Commission. And I had provided a draft, and I do have an amended. I don't know whether the Commission has had an opportunity to look at it or not.
I haven't seen it. Oh, here it is, yeah.
I can briefly go through with one amendment I want to make, and if anyone else obviously can comment as we go through. The first one is we provide quarterly reviews of the budget, revenues, expense, variations for all of the funds, general and enterprise, as well as the status of the city's capital program for all of the funds. The annual, we recommended approval of the annual budget amendment. We recommended continue the initiative to implement the Water and Sewer Department's septic mitigation STEP program. We reviewed and recommended the quarterly Finance Department's rate sufficiency studies. Now, this last one, I want to make a correction. I said the creation of the pension board for the general fund. There are, and there have been active pension boards for the finance and for the police, but the general fund pension review board was evidently on hold until the finance director reinstituted it this year, and Glenn has been collaborating and doing various backgrounds on this as well as some other subjects. So we didn't recommend a creation. We recommended that we continue and we would coordinate with the board. So that was just one item. Additionally, as you know, at the City Council's direction, we identified potential electric utility rate decreases, presented it to the staff for review. The staff performed SWOT analysis of the proposals, and we reported back with recommending them. Several elements were either implemented or in progress. Others were not recommended, and some others were unacceptable to the City Council, for example, raising taxes as an option. And we supported analyzing the establishment of a stormwater utility fund and potential for an electric utility authority to analyze it and go forward, not the establishment of one. Second item was review of the proposed 2014-15 budget, and we expressed certain concerns regarding the funding of the stormwater mitigation, streets and road maintenance, and the high level of legal and consulting expenses associated with all the actions that are taken against the city. We acknowledged the need for long-range planning. We discussed an updating of the 2013 version of the 5-year prospective budgets. The problem is there's so many uncertainties today in regard to the future of the electric utility. It was exceedingly difficult to try to put together until some of those variables and issues are resolved. We discussed reservations on the financial viability of relocating the water and sewer facilities and its operations from the present lagoon frontage site. We recognize the difficulty in identifying comparable municipal entities. City of Vero Beach is unique in the array and scope of facilities, operations, services, and demographics. For example, it is difficult, if impossible, to find another municipality that has a public airport, public marina, public cemetery, a electric utility, a water sewer utility, a solid waste utility, its police department, over 200 events annually utilizing city support, its parks, its recreation, its public works, its police supporting these various events, 4th of July, Christmas, so forth. The Veterans Memorial Island and Sanctuary. And then there's significant seasonal services demands from tourists, visitors, and part-time residents. My point is that, or our point would be, that because of all those different elements, it's extremely difficult to find something that's exactly comparable to the City of Vero Beach in trying to determine benchmarking or comparisons in total of all of these support services that we have here. I didn't mean to go too fast. Clearly, if there's any discussion, well, I'll just go through, and if there's any at the end. Our objectives and goals is we are committed to have an expert consultation regarding the analysis of the pension funding by the actuary, the status of conversion of the general fund pension plan from defined benefit to defined contribution, what its impact would be, and an in-depth review of funding of the health benefits pre- and post-retirement, the OPEB, and the impact of proposed requirements for trust funds instead of a current pay-as-you-go policy. Glenn, I know you have been involved in this. I would recommend, and I discussed this with Cindy, that we have a special workshop meeting solely on this subject, rather than try to cram it within a significant normal meeting. So, and I don't know what the status of that would be. Cindy.
I've had conversation with our OPEB actuary, and I think we talked about this last time. Some of the things, the changes that the city made actually in the last fiscal year impact the actuarial valuation, we're hoping fairly substantially in a good way. And so they're doing a roll forward of the numbers that's probably going to take them until January. So what they prefer to do is update the current liability. In other words, get a good current number for the liability and their actuarial projections going forward before they then take those numbers and lay out for you, the commission, how a trust fund would work and how the financing of a trust fund would work, how much per year would go in, what the assumptions would look like in terms of the growth of the fund. So the last time Jim Rizzo and I talked, we're looking at probably late January that we could schedule. And I told him my goal is this. It's too late for fiscal 14-15 to do anything about a trust fund. We did not adopt a budget that would allow us to make huge cash contributions to a brand new fund. But certainly as we move into the budget activities for 15-16, if we can have this conversation among ourselves in January, February, come up with a recommendation for City Council, give everyone a chance to chew on the numbers, we could incorporate that into our budget discussions for the following fiscal year. So that's kind of my rough goal, if that works for you.
I think that's acceptable. I think that's what we should do. Yeah.
So we'll leave that open to a date in January, early February, based upon outside of any normal meetings we would have. And we'll leave it for you to coordinate, Cindy, and then get back
Sherry,
to us with.
See what we can do to find a date that works for everyone. But it's a fairly complex topic, so I think it would be worth dedicating a meeting to that and not.
I just think we should get it over with before the budget season starts again, and we're behind the schedule again. So let's try to get it over with first quarter.
But again, without the updated roll forward numbers, we're kind of spinning our wheels with old numbers, so I'd like to see the new numbers to go with it. And right now, their focus and mine is to get me that for the CAFR, and not anything beyond that. So it should be late January, early February.
Questions? Justin? Going on with objectives and goals, we'll have scheduled planned quarterly meetings. We're only required to have 4 a year. But at the direction, ad hoc meetings are called, this would be one of them, that we just discussed, but also the City Council from time to time directs the Finance Commission to study various issues, which we have done. One of the things, Cindy, if you want to comment on prospectively the future technological and process changes and efficiencies as proposed, the finance director. There's only one director.
I was hoping I was getting some help, but I guess that's a typo.
And this is in regard to the entire customer service and billing process.
We actually had a kickoff yesterday or the day before for the upgrade of our software for our billing system. And that is the huge first step that we have to take before we can implement some of the banking technology improvements like e-box and lockbox, and then before we can take that third step of talking about real customer service portals through kiosks in the lobby or websites in terms of payment and bill pay, et cetera. So that first step right now, the schedule for that software upgrade, because we are something in the neighborhood of 10 years and 8 or 9 versions out of date, is late May, early June. And once that's done and online, then we'll be coming back to you with the next stage, which is the banking process improvements.
Comments? Going to the rest, we want to continue to welcome public comment throughout the proceedings. We will coordinate and synchronize working relationship with the utilities and other commissions and boards, respond and report to the City Council as directed, and serve on special projects committees, which we have from time to time over a plethora and myriad subjects. And finally, the commitment and participation of our commission members. We attended general fund and police pension board meetings. We have attended the police and Teamsters negotiations. We've been involved in utility and recreation commission meetings. There's extensive coordination by all of the commissioners with the city manager, the finance director, the police chief, and the department heads throughout the year. And then they continue to have the various reports and recommendations as directed by the City Council.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, if I could, the Finance Director. Is the City Council supposed to vote next month on the general general employees pension?
That is actually part of the subject of our current impasse and/or mediation with the union. And if Jim wants to address that, I want to tread lightly on that while we're in a period of silence.
The arbitrator or the mediator made a decision. Is that not right?
Well, our mediator made a decision, but it's my understanding there's a period of time during which none of us supposed to be talking. So I'll let you deal with this.
We can't talk to the City Council, and the union is not supposed to talk to amongst themselves either. But we've had a mediation, and the mediator submitted his findings, and it's a typical mediator. You cut the baby in half, and half goes here and half goes there. We have objected to that. Ours was a total package, all or nothing. We have written and filed that as an exception to the mediation, which the next step will be to the City Council. Sometime around the first part of January, we will be going to City Council with the total package.
Okay. Thank you.
And did you see, can we speak to what their recommendation was on am I allowed to say that? Essentially, the mediator's recommendation on the defined benefit plan change was, as you pointed out, a split the baby, that we freeze the defined benefit plan to new entrants only, rather than doing a full stop freeze for all existing employees. And so that going forward, there would be no new entrants into the plan, but the plan would continue for those who are currently in it and vested. That was essentially the recommendation.
You mean a defined contribution plan for new employees?
For all new employees.
That's correct. And again, ours, and then he also took the pay and talked about elevating folks up into the step system and some of these other things. And again, ours was a total package, and our direction from the council at this point has been that we would go from a defined benefit to a defined contribution plan, and that's the direction we're going.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, you need a motion on this annual report?
If I could, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
could I suggest one more thing that might be missing that I know staff appreciates tremendously, and that is over the course of the last year, various members of the Finance Commission have participated in RFP evaluation and selection committees, including the audit, including the selection of a DC provider, and that takes a lot of time on the part of individual Finance Commission members, and the staff is very grateful when they do that. So I just want to suggest that maybe you add that bullet as participation, because that's a huge time commitment.
Well, thank you. Did you get that, Sharon? With that, with those amendments we discussed, do I have a motion on accepting the report to which we would provide to the City Council?
I make a motion, Mr. Chairman, and that was also to change the terminology, the wording in the how did you word that, Mr. Chairman? The renewing of the pension review board, or how did you leave that?
Well, pension, there were the three boards. Two of them were active, the fire and police. It was somewhat dormant for the general fund that the finance director reinstituted, and that was what Glenn was involved in discussions on, and we had discussed. So my point was that we didn't recommend a creation.
Right.
We just recommend that go forward with re-energizing it.
Okay, would you like to use that term, re-energizing the pension review board, for the purpose of my motion?
That's fine.
Okay.
If you want to just make your motion that you're approving it with the amendments that were made.
Okay, I just didn't hear what that amendment was, particularly with that one, Sherry, that's all.
Okay.
Okay, I just make a motion that we accept the 2014 annual report of the Finance Commission, including the objectives and goals for 2014-2015.
Have a second?
Second, but you mean it's subject to the adjustments that City just recommended?
Yeah.
Mr. Paul?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the one that
That's right, if it's with
And the language
amendments.
clarification that you requested, right, John?
Yes, that's right, with the proposed amendments.
Got it?
the indication I have from our accomplished support is that as long as we talk about the amendments, because we have a typo that they took away one of your directors, and the others that we put in, is to accept them with the amendments.
Just got it.
So I second the motion.
Thank you.
Call for a question.
Call the question.
Have you called it?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passed unanimously. All right.
Good work, Mr. Chairman.
What's that?
Good work.
No, it's the work. As I said, because this commission has been together over several years, with four of us being on for those number. There have been numerous changes in the city staff, very positively, and there's been changes in the city council. So the background that we've accumulated on some of these issues, which are enormously complex, and as you mentioned, when you get into municipal accounting, I was going to bring up some of those. It is not intuitively obvious if you come from the private sector on how various funds are accounted for. And I'm sure Catherine, from her experience with the private sector, finds the same thing. It just is different. And trying to get into the specific specificity and spending the kind of time, you just can't do this in sound bites. Unfortunately for the public, trying to explain and to the dialogue that Jim just had regarding some of the intricacies of these negotiations. Do not lend them to a headline in a print publication and 2 paragraphs of explanation. So I just wanted to thank everything, all of the time that the commission has put in. As I said, we're supposed to have 4 meetings a year. We've been averaging around 8 to 10. But okay, if I may move on, old business.
I had mine addressed.
Hearing none. Finance Director's Matters, the fourth quarter financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we have here are 3 items, 2 of which are almost 3 months in our rearview mirror now, so we'll go ahead and have a quick look at where we, at least on a preliminary basis, where we ended the fiscal year 13-14, understanding that these are preliminary, that we're in the process of preparing the audited financial statements right now, that there are further adjustments that will take place before these become the CAFR, but not many. So we're fairly close to done. The bottom line is we ended up pretty much where we thought we would be when we approved the budget amendment. That was fairly recent and fairly accurate with regard to revenues and expenditures by fund. Some of the things that we'll find in here that we've added that we continue to make a part of this report. On page 8, you see the cash and investments balance by fund. So you can see total cash, not restricted, et cetera, but total cash where each fund ended the fiscal year, a total of a little over $68 million with a little over $9 million in the general fund, about $30.5 in the electric utility, about 15 in water and sewer, et cetera. So some of the small negative amounts there are ones we know about and have taken steps to address, particularly Parks and Recreation, which will no longer be its own fund in the coming year per the adopted budget and will become a part of the general fund. The next page is a debt service payment summary, and one of the reasons we give that to you is because, as we've talked about in the past, the way these financial statements are done, the principal payments on the debt do not show as expenses in the various funds. So that's why we like for you to have this, so you can have that column that shows the principal payments and know that for any given fund, you have to add that to the total expenditures of that fund to come up with a real total expenditures for that fund.
Can I just interrupt? I'm sorry.
Sure.
And just to prove that point, if you go back to page
29 is a good place to see that.
I was going to go back to page 4.
Actually, the one where it is the biggest, I would say, is 29. I'd actually tag that one. So if we could, this is where you really can add 2 numbers together and see what I'm talking about, I think.
Okay.
On 29, at the very bottom of the page, you see the debt service for the 2003A and the 2008, the 2 outstanding loans in the electric utility. And you see a year-to-date actual of $1.7 million versus the 5.5. If you go back to that page we were just looking at, on page 9, that $1,776,042 is purely interest. That's all you see there. You don't see the principal of $3.725 million. The next line down, that debt service for the Series 2008, again, if you look back at page 9, $79,054 is just interest, and all of that principal payment. Remember, we paid that loan down, so it was a $4.2 million principal payment. That's, again, not reflected there on page 29 as being an expense. So you take that almost $8 million and add that to the bottom line of the electric utility, then you start to come out with something that's a little closer to the $93 million that we showed as the amended budget. And that works for the water sewer, and it works on the marina fund as well because of the way that principal payments get posted. It's part of our quarterly variance analysis every quarter because it's always a variance. And someday, I don't know, we'll come up with a better way of showing it.
And Hugh, that was one of the points I was making. If you look at the total revenues and total expenses, as Cindy mentioned, for all of the funds, there is an enormous difference because they don't book the debt as an expense. So it looks like it's a lot better in terms of operations than what the numbers show. And that's really, I had asked Cindy to go through with that because someone looking at this from the public would say, well, the revenue line says this and the expense line says this in your report, and then how come, what happened to the $5 million is in difference that is in the electric fund between the two? And
Yeah,
it
but
has to do-
good corporate accounting would have income statement and a cash flow statement, and you could reconcile it there.
And
So
you'll
it's-
have that when you have the CAFR.
It's really what you got here.
Yeah.
It's much the
Preliminary.
same.
And when we have the CAFR will show
Yeah.
a cash flow statement that shows the cash
Yeah.
basis and the change in capital assets net of related
You
debt.
just think in terms of
Yeah.
cash flow and profits.
Yeah.
It's, I don't think our new member will have any problem with that at all.
No, this is
No,
sort of a weird,
it just-
sort of a weird
Whatever.
hybrid cash flow / income statement. I'll tell you the other thing too, and then again we can, as you know, over the years we've worked with these reports, we've added things to them, we've modified them to make them more useful, including some of the graphs and charts we're looking at now. But if you look at page 7. And you see expenditures by fund for all funds. That roll-up across all the city sub-funds is extremely misleading, for instance, because 401, the electric fund, in the budget for expenditures, includes the transfer of $7 million to the debt service sinking fund, 402, which shows $7 million of expenditures with debt going out. So it's there twice. See what I'm saying? I mean, 401 sends $7 million to 402, and 402 takes that $7 million and pays the debt with it. And so you've got it in there twice. I have always been not a big fan of a giant roll-up of all funds on a government basis because one of the biggest differences between government accounting and private accounting is fund accounting. And when you take all the city's funds, including sinking funds, and you roll them up like this, it's semi-meaningless, at least for those of us who, for instance, as you now realize, you're double counting the debt in more than one place, in all the sinking funds. So it's a page, but it's not my favorite page. That's why I skip right past it every time.
Well, thank you.
My favorite page in this particular report is 30.
30?
That's the page I
Okay,
use.
before you go there, could you go back to page 9 for just a minute? So I'm not good with graphs, but you see on page 9, bottom there, the blue vertical line with a red top under electric. This is fiscal year 13 and 14. Now, those are just service payments
Those are interest and principal added together.
For-
The service
For
of
that
debt
year.
for that year, and that
So
year
it's
included
almost $10 million.
right. But remember, that year included at your recommendation paying off that
Right.
one loan for
Exactly.
$4 million. That's the
Okay.
reason it was so big that particular year.
Okay, but that vertical line represents $8 million of payments on principal. Is that right? Am I reading that right?
And $4 million of it was the payoff of that loan, which is now
Right.
gone. But
Okay.
you're correct.
Okay, but for $8 million paid on a debt under electric, do you know offhand, what's the total amount of our debt to OUC and FMPA on these bonds? I know it.
I have
It's
no
not fair,
idea.
but do you have any idea?
I don't. Maybe Jim does. The only bonds that I concern myself with in terms of city coverage is our outstanding bonds that
Do you
we're
think
directly
they might be in the
responsible
range
for.
of 60 million to 80 million? Is that right? Or you're making you work today.
You know, I've seen the number,
I haven't
and I don't remember what it is. The problem with our FMPA debt service is that they do refinancing every so often, and that refinancing sort of extends and increases the debt. And so that has occurred on several occasions. And so their numbers
reason
sort of
why I'm
fluctuate.
If you look at their CAFR, which you and I did, I think I sent you that page. It's a refunding of a refunding of a refinancing of a refunding across so many years that it's really, really hard to follow the bouncing
So
ball.
the answer to the question is that we are a small element of whatever their financing is, but it's probably a very large number over time.
Okay, the reason why I'm asking is a thought occurred to me. If it's $80 million, I'm just saying if total amount of our indebtedness. If we paid $8 million this year, in 10 years we got to pay it off.
But
That
again,
doesn't sound right to me because from what I'm hearing, these obligations go on to eternity.
well,
That's
for starters, the $8 million is a distorted number. Our annual debt service is around $4 million in principal. The only reason that
Okay.
number is that
All right.
big
Okay.
is that one-time payoff of the rest of that loan.
Okay, so it'd be 20 years to pay off.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
If that's a set figure.
Yeah,
What you're saying is it may just be.
And I think that's what Dan, that's what our issue is. We set our figures so we know where we are. We don't do refinancing except whenever we can get our rates down, and the refinancing we've done has not extended the terms. And in FMPA's case, they have done refinancing on multiple occasions to extend terms, also to do projects on the plants. And coming back, the debt service is only one element with FMPA. We got to remember that if we paid off all the debt on Stanton and Stanton 2, we still own a piece of that plant. We still have incurred costs for the operation, and we still own a piece of that plant till somebody takes it offline and cleans up the site. So, even the components are there, and this is an assumption on my part, I guess, in FMPA's case, they know that they're going to have that plant for the entire duration, so refinancing doesn't seem to be an issue with them. And if somebody goes out there and does a new scrubber on there and it costs $5 million, then FMPA evidently goes out and borrows $5 million and refinances what they've got. And that is a challenge, because that's decisions being made outside of our preview. But you're right, we can show a fairly straight line reduction of our debt in the city. The FMPA debt really is the life of the plants, no matter what that number is.
And for St. Lucie, I believe it's 2043.
Correct, right now.
Nobody knows, really.
That's
Sorry,
So page 30.
you wanted to
Page 30?
be the bearer of some really good news.
I did, because this is my segue into the last quarter electric rate sufficiency from fiscal 13-14. This is our balance sheet that we put in, our consolidated balance sheet we started putting in for the electric utility. And as you know, our goal has been to drive the unrestricted cash back up over the 90-day mark, and I'm happy to report that as of, obviously a few more adjustments to be made, but it shouldn't change much. As of September 30th, we're at 91 days of unrestricted cash on hand. And that is without removing the $2 million that we were holding in abeyance or holding as restricted to satisfy the bond covenants. Back when we refunded the 2008, we had talked about the fact that, in the strictest of terms, we don't really have to show it like that on the balance sheets if we don't want to, but we can even show it that way to make our bondholders happy and still have 91 days of unrestricted cash on hand in the electric utility. So we've successfully brought that back to where we think we need to be as a good operating number.
And we started in, the 70 range?
It was about 76, I think,
Yeah,
the first time I
about
put one of these
74
in.
days, I thought. Yeah,
And that's with paying that debt off,
yeah.
which poised us to have better rate sufficiency for the coming
And
years.
lowering the rates twice during the year. So I think that some of the allegations of not managing this utility appropriately, I think, are way off the mark in terms of what perhaps the urban legend is about how this plant is managed and how the staff is directing it.
Certainly, if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to have a look, and I can forward it through Sherry, at the Fitch review that we recently got, where they went through our balance sheets and our income statements and our financial results and a host of other things since the last time that they did a review and actually downgraded us. And we're very complimentary about the quarterly review of rate sufficiency, the judicious management of this utility as a going concern, the increase in cash balances on hand with the 90 days being the goal for the end of the year, and gave us a very favorable review. So if you haven't seen that, I'd be happy to forward that.
The only point I'd make on page 8 and comparing it to page 30 is these statements are public statements, so the public can see these things pretty easily, right, Cindy? Mm-hmm. They're all available for the public.
They are.
And it just intuitively, it would appear like it would be better to break out some of the funds between the restricted and non-restricted, because they look differently. If you look at the utility, it says we got $30 million, but the reality is our unrestricted funds are still only about $19 million.
Mm-hmm. And that's
right?
why on the balance sheet you'll
In
see.
the balance sheet, it shows that if the
I show
public
the
ever
total
gets
cash
there.
balance at the bottom so that you can
Right.
see that it ties to the 30, but I show the restricted portion. So,
Yeah.
the only other ones that have significant amounts of restricted cash are, certainly water, sewer, and then when you come to the various asset management, Whitaker Trust, and the infrastructure funds, those are all, the entire balance is restricted by state law because they have to be expended on capital. So, again, when you get to the CAFR does break out restricted and assigned and committed. There's
Right.
new GASB classifications.
And they're pretty much self-contained on an expense factor too. So
Yeah, to do it
Right.
here would make that many pages, and so I was just trying to. That was just sort of a, hey, look, we have cash and investments. We're in pretty good shape in that regard. So.
Right, but I'm still a little concerned about how the public sees this. I mean, the reality is when the auditor gets done with a general fund, he will show it as a negative cash.
No, not the general fund.
Well, he did last year. Remember?
That wasn't negative cash.
What?
That was on the government wide after.
That was on the government
after the
statement,
OPEB.
right?
Yeah.
When he rolled it in.
When he rolled in the OPEB, it shows it not a negative cash. Not a negative cash. Cash is
A
cash.
negative. What do you call that? Net fund.
Unrestricted net asset.
Right.
Yeah. No.
That turned negative.
Yeah. Cash is
$2
cash.
million or about thereabouts. So.
Yeah, cash is cash and can't be modified by any sort of fancy accounting entry. It is what it is. So that's why there's
But
the,
it rolls into
the
that.
cash version, and then there's the GASB 34 conversion, and then there's the government. They're called government-wide financial statements that include all those adjustments to liabilities, including the OPEB itself.
Right. I receives all that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so.
When I went through it, the statements, looked at them pretty carefully, and I was trying to compare working capital needs, and it appeared like the only one that was short of really sort of maintaining itself was the marina with marginal cash in it, and I guess their monthly expenses are about $150,000, and
Yeah,
they carry about $25,000 in cash, so they obviously are.
They've been slowly improving. I think that when you
They're
look
making
at
headway, right?
They are making headway. What happened to the marina, and I've had this conversation. I actually did some pro formas for the Marine Commission. Is for the first few years after they borrowed the money for that property, they had a find grant to pay the debt service, and then that find grant went away after 3 years, and the marina had to pay the entire debt service itself out of operations, and so there was a dip for a while. But with the economy coming back, the marina revenues will
Right.
come back, and I think you're going to see, at least my preliminary look is a pretty positive income statement at this year's CAFR for the marina. They're starting to dig it back out of that dip down. So.
When I looked at the marina a little bit this year, I mean, again, I noticed the spread on the gasoline and diesel sales were not what it should have been. Now, are we buying gas?
That's unfortunately it really is, and I'd
Are we
encourage you.
buying on spot market? What do we
No.
do? A contractor?
No, there's timing differences in the way, and there's differences in the way that it shows as inventory. Here's my point.
So it's an inventory shift, huh?
Tim monitors that on a daily basis. He does a really good job of paying attention to his margin. So I would encourage you to talk to him. He's got better.
Just looked a
sight.
little. Looked.
He does a very good job of managing his margin. You can't just take the totals here and divide them by the other one and come up with his margin. That's not.
Could have been
the way
a
this
way.
We have a contract, but it's indexed, carried. So we go on a petroleum index, so our monthly rates are based on that with the markup of delivery.
So he's got a consistent plan in it. So it's not an inventory shift.
Well, the inventory changes in value based on what we paid for the fuel the month before, because you could have either a higher price or lower price fuel in inventory based on what you paid that particular month.
But it goes into inventory at cost and it doesn't get adjusted. That's government accounting doesn't adjust inventory to market. It goes in at cost and it stays there. So that's part of the reason for the timing difference.
But our markup per gallon stays the same.
It's still the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just one of those here. Welcome to government accounting. You don't mark inventory to market. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Discussion?
and then as we talked about, the only two that we see anything that we're not happy about that we are all well aware of is the recreation fund, which we've rolled into the general fund, and the cemetery, which again is slowly improving, and we're doing the best we can to improve it by watching rates and doing all the marketing that we can. So.
Senator, just again, if any of the public is watching, the issue of where we show a negative revenue in the electric fund. No.
So are you talking about the FEMA thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in multiple funds. What you might recall is we've been fighting the good fight with our friends at FEMA for since well before I came here and for the 3+ years that I've been here, with regard to some PWs that they had given us money for that they then came along and decided that we owed the money back. And, long story short, most of it revolved around insurance issues that have subsequently been resolved. And our first and second appeals have both been forwarded through the state to FEMA, demonstrating that indeed we do not owe them this money back. Because of the way that the feds handled the state this time, and we are not the only ones. There are probably about 10 to 15 cities in this boat. The feds took the approach of guilty until proven innocent, and they reached into the state coffers and they removed all of the money that was in dispute before our appeal was resolved, leaving the state short of monies to fund current disasters. And so being between that rock and a hard place, what the state has asked all of us to do is begin repayment of the amounts in dispute pending resolution of the dispute. So that's what we've done. And we've been able to spread it over 2 years, hoping against hope that some resolution of our dispute will come along in 2 more years. And so that's where you see the negative amounts. There's actually more than one fund that has a little piece of the monthly repayment, and we're repaying it, and hopefully at some point it'll get reversed. I will tell you, on September the 8th, the state rendered their opinion about our appeal and sent it forward to the feds. And I have it with me if anyone wants to see it. But essentially they said, look, the applicant has given you everything that you need in order to grant their appeal. This documentation is excellent, and you need to agree with them and stop tormenting them. That's essentially what it says. So we'll see how that all pans out, but in the meantime, we're in good faith to the state. We're slowly repaying it as we wait. So. We were working within the state website to do something last year. And you know how you have a drop down on a date, and we clicked the date drop down for the year, and the oldest one was 1914, which we loved because we're pretty sure there's still public PWs open from 1914 that people are still working on appeals for. So just a little stick at the state. So if we have, if we're done with this one, it kind of takes us to the 13-14 electric utility rates efficiency, the fourth quarter. I don't know if everyone has a copy of this. And essentially, on this summary page, what we've done is taken these results of operations, the actual expenditures for purchase power cost, the actual billed revenue through September, and loaded them into our normal rate sufficiency. And what we're seeing is a surplus of about $770,000 at year end, as opposed to the little over $900,000 that we originally forecasted back in September of 2013. So to go with the increase in unrestricted cash, this makes us happy. And this is despite, as you pointed out, doing a modest rate adjustment downwards in the middle of the summer. So rate sufficiency for fiscal 13-14 looks good. And that brings us to projected rate sufficiency for 14-15. This particular one only has 1 month of actuals, so we really only have billed revenue and purchase power costs for October at this point. And with that 1 month in, it looks good. Before I put October in, I showed that we were going to be about flat at the current rates, and with October in, we're up about $400,000, which shows you the kind of volatility that you have from month to month, which is why we only do this on a quarterly basis. Bottom line, with 1 month in there, and even with the whole year projection, it makes us fairly comfortable that we can leave the rates alone at this time and keep doing what we've always done, which we'll look at this again in January when we have a full quarter to see where we stand. And more importantly, if it stays good, we're underway on the rate study right now with PRMG, and it's supposed to be done in March. And if we can manage it, we'd like to leave the rates alone until the consultant comes and makes a recommendation. Let me say one more thing about these before I move on, and that is understand that there is none of the changes that have been discussed to the OUC contract are incorporated into the purchase power forecast in this rate sufficiency in any way. This is absolutely status quo, business as usual. The contract's on the table as they are right now in terms of our forecast for the coming year. Anything different would only go in here if and when it comes to fruition. So there's no speculation in here. This is the contracts as they sit now. And then I think you had a question, Mr. Powers.
Cindy, if I could raise a question on these, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Of course.
In comparing 13-14 against 14-15, I noted two things that on the expense side, and like customer service is up almost 200 grand. Non-departmental expenses up 500 grand. That's on the expense side. On the revenue side, let's just talk about transfer of funds. We're down about $1.7 million between the two. But at the end of the day, when it gets down to our projection, at the end of the day, it looks like customer service revenue is up by 200 grand. Expenses are up by 200 grand on the customer service. Mm-hmm. Why is non-departmental up $500,000 versus last year?
Okay.
And what is, when I look at other revenue, customer service last year about 269,000. This year about 503, and right below it there's a really strange item called miscellaneous revenue. Last year we had a -9, and this year we got a positive 296,000.
Okay, I'm going to take those one at a time. You ready? Can you hold any more
Right,
so I can
just get
catch
me
up?
through it. I'm
Catch
trying
up
to
with
figure
you.
out because at the end of the day our profits is in the projected profit is in the miscellaneous revenue.
Right. Okay, so hold that right there so I can catch up with you a little bit. The non-departmental from one year to the next.
Okay, that's the $500,000 pickup.
Mm-hmm. The probably the primary thing is the actual expenditures that we had in the professional services line item for attorney's fees versus what we had budgeted. Because as you know, for the most of 13-14, we had budgeted $1 million, and things were pretty much on hiatus, and we didn't really pick up any steam spending attorney's fees until late August and September. So the actuals, the preliminary financials for 13-14 came in way under that million. The budget for 14-15 is $500,000.
So you're carrying it forward.
Oh no, 2 different years.
No.
2 different years. But we budgeted $500,000
That's what I'm
for
saying.
14-15.
So
we budgeted $1 million for 13-14 and came nowhere near that.
I know.
So this is actuals, and this is next year's
going
budget.
forward.
Yeah. Now, back with 14-15, whether the $500,000 we dialed the budget back to based on 13-14 will be sufficient remains to be seen, given the update we had here recently about what we're going to be doing this year.
So
all we can do is take our best shot at that.
So it's in the professional fees, we think. Okay.
Customer service charges. We had some conversation about this during the budget season. I went in and did the number that customer service was charging water, sewer, and solid waste had been static for years and years and years, and had been sort of a here's a good number kind of a number. So I went in and did an analysis and tied the allocation of customer service charges to the other 2 utilities to objective criteria: number of bills, number of meters read, number of customers, number of bills rendered. So it actually caused it to go up once I did what I thought was a good objective analysis. And frankly, for the amount that we're charging water or sewer to render bills and deal with customers for like 11,000 customers is about $400,000. Rob Bolton is not does
So
not
you're
have
picking
a
up
problem
more.
with that.
You're actually going to pick up more revenue then.
A little bit. And we did it again.
We're projecting more revenue on the pickup side for the water.
Because we're charging them for
We're charging what we should have been charging. We're charging
what
now.
we should have been charging them.
We should have.
We've talked about this over the years. The first 2 or 3 years of budgets that Jim and I did, I found probably a number of places where costs were sort of, I think, disproportionately shifted toward the electric utility, and I've slowly but surely been moving them back the other direction. So we think we have a good, accurate number for what should be charged to water and sewer for the services provided to them for solid waste. Miscellaneous revenue, again, 13-14 is actuals, and you notice that little comment that says includes loss on disposal of assets. In 13-14, the reason that number is negative is it includes the book loss on the fuel that was in the tank.
The fuel adjustment we made last year.
In 14-15, it's based purely at this point still on the revenues, and some of the things that fall into miscellaneous revenues are sales of surplus materials and scrap, some of the small rental items. We've got money that's coming as a return of premium from the health insurance fund, so truly miscellaneous. But that's the reason it went negative in 13-14.
Well, let me say at the bottom, at the end of the day, though, when you really look at it carefully, we're running a $90 million operation a year. and we're projecting, a $400,000 bottom line. Now, I mean, that's a pretty thin air factor, I got to tell you, and particularly when you look at it and say, okay, revenue is forecast to be down by $2.2 million, and we balanced it back by reducing the debt service by $1.7 million, and we're optimistically forecasting a $90 million operation with a 1% air factor. That's the bottom line, right?
We've had this conversation.
I know we have. This is a pretty, but it's
last
getting
year
worse.
it was about 1%. And our goal in this rate sufficiency, at least my goal in this rate sufficiency.
I just want the public to understand how tight this market is.
Very tight.
Very tight margin for a $90 million company.
And what our stated goal has been, as we've talked about this, is that we want rate sufficiency. In other words, we have to see a positive number with a reasonable margin without, massively padding it. But by the same token, I agree with you. We are running this very close to the bone, which is why we've gotten better, obviously, over the years at projecting, but which is why two things. One, that's why we're doing a professional rate study, a rate sufficiency and rate structure study, because I want to hear from a consultant what they think about this. And second, that's why we look at it quarterly and make those minor adjustments, because this can shift. Well, this week, as cold as it is, that could send it one direction or the other fairly quickly.
Well, I just think all of us on the finance committee should remember how tight this little beggar is.
Well, but understanding there's a 6% rate of return to the city in terms of a transfer payment.
I understand, but that is not free money that goes to the city. The city needs every dollar of it.
I understand that.
There's no fat cat over there either.
The key is we have to strike that balance between being bankers and utility operators, and Cindy and I have that discussion as well, because we do have adequate cash on hand, and so we try to make sure that we understand that number, that 91 days. And then, but you're right. I mean, we try to hit, and she's been very good at hitting at that 1 or 2% the last couple of years.
I'm not faulting you. I'm just pointing out how thin this is.
Yeah, it's
for a $90 million company.
We're not over profiting it.
There's no excess profit in this thing that I can see.
That's why I put not only the dollar amount, but next to it, see where it says percent of revenue forecast, for exactly that reason. People look at $1 million and they go, "Wow, $1 million," and I'm like, that is 1%, and that is a really thin margin for a volatile utility that's weather dependent. Of all things. So I agree with you.
I'm just not sure the public understands how thin the margins are. Number one, number two. When you look at the return on our capital, the risks we've taken over the years to get the place put in place. Now, I'm on both sides of the ledger. I hear the county bitching about the rates. But the reality is some of the subdivisions would have never gotten built without the power plant in place years back. So it's a thin margin. We get a fairly thin return on our capital, and we are spending a lot of the taxpayers' money, not taxpayers, but the utility rate payers, to defend the issue. That's what it really comes down to, right?
Yeah, including the $1 million that we have to budget to pay off the lawyers to fight the city.
But put that in proper perspective. Earlier in the meeting, you say that 62% of our customer base is outside the city. So it's really not our taxpayers paying all these bills. Our taxpayers are paying a portion. Most of them are being paid by non-residents. Okay, yes, sir.
Our ratepayers are paying. Our ratepayers
the ratepayers pay all the bills, but the fact of the matter is, it's sort of like the ratepayers for Florida Power and Light. They're not owners of the assets of Florida Power and Light. They are ratepayers because they're buying a product. We are selling a commodity, i.e. an electron, and that's the city's position in this exercise that we're going through. Okay. But you're right. 60% of our customers have the right to voice their opinions and what they're doing, and they obviously are doing that. So we're
and very effectively they've been driving the rates down. They've done a good job of making their case. As best we can, we've been pulling the rates down as best we can.
He and I have been racking our brains to come up with an example of an industry where buying a company's product gives you ownership of the company. You buy a product and that doesn't. I don't own AT&T for paying my monthly phone bill or own Comcast. I wish I was Comcast.
It sort of begs the question here, since we're talking about ratepayers. Who really owns Vero Electric?
Vero,
The
the city of
city.
Vero Beach.
City of Vero Beach.
You look under all the assets and the piece of ground that the assets are sitting on,
Okay.
the deed is in the city of Vero Beach.
Mr. Wright has said our name doesn't appear on any of the contracts. If I
That is
heard him-
correct. The city of Vero Beach does not, for risking of taxpayers, it is, but the city of Vero Beach is on all the deeds and we as the city have to sign. There is no such thing as the Vero Beach Electric Department. It's the Vero Beach Electric Utility that is a subsidiary of the city of Vero Beach. So all the assets.
Okay.
Again, you go and look at the substation in Indian River Shores as an example. That piece of ground was acquired by the city of Vero Beach. The asset that is sitting on there was paid through rates collected through the city of Vero Beach utility.
There is no separate entity, separate EIN. It's just
Okay, then
it's
do
an
we-
enterprise fund of the city of Vero Beach
they
with
don't
one
own
municipal
anything.
entity.
Yes, sir.
Do we have an easement right then in the shores?
Yes, sir.
Over
We
those-
have an easement, and we
So-
also own the property. We actually own the property.
The real estate or the tangible pipes?
We own the real estate that the substation sits on.
All right.
The deed is in the city of Vero Beach's name. Similar to the substation we have on the South Beach, the deed of the property actually is in the city of Vero Beach. So coming back to your question, the one we have west of town, out off 58th or something, the deed of the property is owned by the city of Vero Beach. The utility infrastructure, if you look at any contract, I sign the contracts. And so those contracts are really city of Vero Beach contracts. The pledge is the revenue of the utility itself, the customers, i.e. the ratepayers.
Okay, thank you.
No, I appreciate that, Dan, because there's some misapprehension
Yes, there is.
or that where people saying that the ratepayers own the utility. I've heard that.
As though it's a separate entity, and I think what Jim is clarifying is it's just a piece of the city of Vero Beach as a municipal corporation. There's no separate entity or separate, legal entity at all that is the electric utility.
I don't know. I think as this dispute goes on, there may become a differential in the type of property, tangible property versus intangible property. When you get into these value of these power contracts and obligations under them, that's intangible. Who are the owners of some of these contracts? Who owns the equity? Who's responsible for some of the liability? I think that's what some of these out-county people are saying.
And that is true. The key is the city has the equity and also has the liability, but what they've done is they've eliminated the exposure of the city, i.e. the ad valorem taxes being at risk, and they placed it on the utility customer, i.e. the ratepayers. But the theory is, and it's the same theory that all utilities, whether it's water, sewer, electric, or whatever, you are buying a commodity, and you're not paying for anything but that electron that goes through your meter. You're not buying a wire, you're not buying a manhole in the water business or in the sewer business, you're buying a commodity, and so therefore the use of that commodity, once it goes through your meter, that's your choice of what you're doing. When we string a new wire, in reality is not the choice of the ratepayer. It's actually the choice of the city council.
So I just wanted to make those observations when I was looking at it,
I appreciate that. And so essentially what we have here, obviously we can't raise rates for 13-14. That's behind us. That's just a checkup, if you will, health and status. But the 14-15 recommendation, at least at this point, is that we leave rates where they sit at this time until we're done with the first quarter, and we'll bring that back to you, late January, early February, as we always do, and we can look at it again at that time and see how we sit.
Just to underscore your point, Glenn, the part of Florida Public Utilities permits the investor utilities to earn 11.2% return on their investment, and Florida Power Light to its shareholders pays over 6% in a dividend as well. Mm-hmm. So that's the differential that to which you're adjusting in terms of what the earnings are for Florida Power Light, as an example.
Right.
The only thing I would need if you're so inclined on this 1415 one is a motion and a vote regarding the staff's recommendation. This will be going to the Utility Commission and then I think eventually to the City Council in January, saying, our recommendation is to leave the rates where they are at this point until the end of the first quarter.
Also move.
Any discussion?
I just wondered, and they're vying for the same rates that Florida Power and Light charges. What alternatives do they have if they cut, from us? Is Florida Power and Light their only other source of power, or
I don't like to
what
talk
alternatives do they have?
I have to make Jim talk about this lawsuit because
Yes,
I'm not allowed to talk.
if you want Florida Power and Light rates, which is what the demand is in the litigation, the only place you're going to get Florida Power and Light rates is from Florida Power and Light. There is no other utility probably on earth, because the mix of the utility itself determines what their rates are. So therefore, in Florida Power and Light's case, gas is their. Now, if you had a major issue with fracking, then you have the rates may go up, but what is being demanded is the FP&L rates, and there's only one entity that can get that.
And they're more than willing to take those customers over.
Well, they really have not been a part of this. And so I think the latest information that I have gotten, as well as what they've said publicly, is that they're still pursuing purchasing of the entire system, and that contract is empowered until 2016. I think Florida Power and Light, as well as we do, electrically speaking, you could probably break the system up, but it would be so unbelievable to do it. Somebody somewhere would have to be purchasing use of transformers, because otherwise you would have substations next to substations. Using Indian River Shores as an example, we have a substation up there on our 69 backbone that really gives reliability to the entire system. And if we lost all the customers, we would still need that 69 line for reliability if we wanted to maintain the same reliability we have today, which I'm sure we would. But FP&L, instead of building a whole new substation, would probably want to use time on those transformers. That type of contractual agreements do exist in the electric utility industry. FP&L has been very clear to us, for example, out at the airport, they were not real crazy about leasing the land where that substation is on our airport, because they like to own the total facility. And if you want to use time on their facility, then they will grant that. So they very well managed company that says if we own the assets, we get to view our destiny, as opposed to relying on some other entity. And if you did that using Indian River Shores again, somewhere along the line we would have to duplicate if both parties are going to have the reliability that they need. And that would be another challenge. Again, not something that can't be accomplished. It's just that it becomes very complicated if, in fact, everybody wants to own their own line and pole.
But in other states, Jim, we do have unregulated power plant. Like in Texas, we can buy power from 2 or 3 sources in one neighborhood, meaning that they're obviously leasing our lines out to get to that particular house. There's a transportation cost, a traffic cost coming through the lines. That would mean that Florida Power and us would have to lease power lines from us, which would mean they couldn't be competitive.
There's an example. We already pay transmission. We pay transmission costs to Florida Power and Light now, because there is no direct OUC line to Vero Beach. So it goes to OUC's territory. Then we lease time or use of a power line from FP&L, and then it comes into the city of Vero Beach. And that's an example of how the industry now works. But you're right, and I think up in the Northeast they had some where you could buy from whatever utility you wanted to. A lot of customers got confused because you're not buying it at the rate that utility has it on their system. You've got to pay for the transmission and the operational cost of getting to your house and meter reading and all those other ancillary issues.
Shipping and handling.
So literally, we could never get Florida Power and Light power because the transmission cost is going to be too high. Traffic costs are going to be too high. what it looks like.
Correct. We can't.
We
but,
can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it would be one of those, the city of Vero Beach, we can't do it under our existing power supply contracts unless something miraculously happens and everybody loves coal and it drives down to a lower rate, which I don't anticipate.
Yeah.
Any more comments? We have a motion on the table to approve the rate sufficiency to maintain the same. I only have one comment. I'm sorry. Any comments? My comment is we're continuing to negotiate with OUC to potentially lower the rates. So at this point, we still have the lawsuit and the Indian River Shore in the county. So why try to anticipate any of those variables and just go forward as long as the sufficiency is there under the accounting practices that sustains what your cash flow is going to be. I second the motion that we just continue and recommend to the city council that
Right.
we steady as she goes.
Yeah.
Have a vote, comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. Now, startlingly, we are to members matters. Are there any matters for the members?
Mr. Chairman, this is nothing to do with this, but I did want to direct this to Jim and his staff, if you don't mind. That's okay, Jim. I just wanted you to know that I also sat on another local committee, and of recent I've had opportunities to deal with some of your line staff, and I want you to know that they're doing a great job. Their customer service is just superb in several different areas. So I wanted, you always hear the bad things, but I want you to know that the folks I've dealt with over the past 2 or 3 months have just been outstanding and a great representative for Vero Beach.
Thank you very much, Noah. I'm very proud of the entire organization. I mean, you take Rob Bolton coming up with the STEP program, and he and I were down at Fort Pierce yesterday talking about this Clean B system where we're going to really change, I think, the dynamics of the sludge that we're handling at the same time, trying to address and hopefully eliminate some of the septic tanks that are within our city. And Monty Falls does an awful lot with very little, and what he does, and he really is dedicated to the system. Rob Slezak and the Recreation, we're now uncovering all these challenges that we sort of deferred maintenance. But the good thing is he's now getting the community involved in some of his projects, and he's very open about that and trying to make sure that we involve as many folks as possible and address it. But I am very proud. We've got an awful lot of good folks working for us, and you think of the guys at the power plant, they've hung in there with us and been very dedicated considering the turmoil that it's one day we're talking about you guys are going to be gone tomorrow. The next day as well, we're going to need the power plant. But I thank you for your comments.
I just have one comment if there's none other. I just asked Sherry to again, to hand out by our Vero Beach Code what the mission and the responsibilities of each of our commission is, and I'll just read I'll just read the one sentence that says, "In performing its mission, the Finance Commission shall initiate its own proposals, make recommendations, and provide alternatives to the City Council." And we've been endeavoring to do that as well as the oversight that we've done. I want to thank everyone on the commission for their efforts. Thank you.
Before we move off, Cindy, I hate to always put the burden on you, but what the heck, you're a big shoulder. You can do it.
Where's that other finance director you mentioned in that annual
You
report?
have a lot of confidence.
Where's that other
in
one?
you,
To do the job of two.
But a couple of months ago, remember, we talked about a simplified balance sheet approach that the public was going to someday see.
The popular annual financial report.
Right.
Can I tell you that just
Is it still in the working stage, or are we?
If a miracle occurs, maybe we'll have one to go with this year's CAFR by April or May. But I've got to tell you, the issue for me at this juncture is 2 or 3 other major initiatives, including the rate study,
Right.
New auditors for my CAFR for
right,
this year,
right.
and we also are undertaking a couple of things we haven't tried before with regard to lease purchases of vehicles, capital financing that are on the finance
Well,
department.
there's a lot going on. There's no doubt about it.
I
Keeping
really
up
want
with
to do it. I've downloaded a few. I know what kind of format I'd like to see, but I might have been just.
I just knew you'd be happy pushing an intellectual exercise. What the heck?
Yeah. If something major happens and I've got like all this free time and I'm excited, I may, but otherwise I might have to stay a dream.
Maybe that could be part of the RFP next time that the.
To have them put together the PAFR. Yeah.
We also we had that on last year's annual report as an objective for this year, and I just discreetly left it off.
It's good to have goals that you haven't attained yet. If you achieve all of them, then there's nothing to reach for, right?
Hugh, what this was is that the recommendation was to put together a brochure that in English described, and a number of cities do that. Why don't you just mention just briefly?
It's called a popular annual financial report, and it's a colored, graph-based Reader's Digest version of the comprehensive annual financial report that gives, in layman's terms, the city's position, balances, debt, customers, and demographics. And I was the one that brought it up, so perhaps I shouldn't have done that till I had a draft together. I was having an excitable moment that day and thought it might be a great thing for the city to do, and I still do. But I'll just be very honest with you. There's a tough quarter ahead of us in terms of, and on top of it, the software change. That billing software change sounds like, you're all used to upgrading your version of Windows at home. Oh no, this is every bill we render, and it has to be 100% right or it's 100% wrong. So that's going to be quite a challenge for us as well.
I understand.
But I'll do my best. I'll keep it on.
I understand.
We'll remember that, Glenn. Can I have a discussion? Any discussion? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
All right.